From across the Immaterium and through the dark veil of space and time, we bring you the Warp Chapter. This is the podcast devoted to talking about the Horus Heresy Legion's digital card game, Horus Heresy lore, Warhammer 40,000, oh my god, Warhammy, Moons Over Warhammy. That's a Denny special. Ladies and gentlemen, whether we're talking about cards, chatting about lore, 40k, heresy, hopefully it's good stuff. Hopefully you enjoy. Hopefully it's not Warhammy stuff. I'm your host, Scuff D, and with me tonight I've got Def, not your physics teacher, who's a content creator, joining us as a guest.
Hey, what's up?
And we've also got my crab co-host, Axel Manning.
It's me, your friendly neighborhood crab pirate.
You need to, yes, there you go, crab pirate extraordinaire. Okay, so yeah, I was thinking about reworking that intro, and then somehow I slipped up with the Warhammy, and I'm just going to stick with it. I'm not going to call it Warhammy 40k, but I think that's going to haunt me. It's somewhere down the road. All right, well, anyways, this is a podcast by players for players to talk about the Horus Heresy Legion game, the things we enjoy about it, strategies, tips, players, who's in our community, what's going on in our community. Today with us, like I said, we've got content creator, Def, not your physics teacher. That's a long title. Is it okay if we just call you physics?
Yeah, sure. Not a problem.
Okay, we will go with that. We'll call you physics. Well, I guess we'll get to the heart of it. Today we're going to be talking about playtesting. Last episode we talked about deck building. That's going to dovetail into playtesting. But before we get into the subject of the matter, I'm going to do a player introduction because I forgot to do that with Shay Goofin last episode till the very end. So, physics, why don't you tell us about yourself?
All right. So, first of all, I'm from Georgia, but the Republic, so often confused with the States. So, well, surprise, surprise, I'm a physics teacher, and that's where the name actually originates from. So, that's actually one of the most common questions that I get. So, where the hell did that name come from? So let me tell you how that actually happened. So it's a fun story. So when I actually started playing and I decided to make a channel or just upload randomly some replays, well, unfortunately got leaked and most of my students knew about my channel. So I was like, maybe I'll just make a funny name so that they can at least laugh about it. But suddenly I just ended up sticking with the name. So there you go. Definitely not your physics teacher. And I
was going to say, I don't know if I had heard that, but in my mind, that's what I always thought was I just imagined you doing it to covertly, throw off any students.
Yeah, that was the idea. But in this case, it was more about, just since it already got leaked, maybe at least they can laugh about it, right? So that was the point overall. So I started playing this game, I think a year ago. I did install this game much earlier, but never really got to get into it. But afterwards, some of my friends also started playing, so I started taking it more seriously. And I think I really started getting into the game last March or something. And that was also the time when I was getting into the whole 40k thing, because my friend did a great job in luring me into this chaotic world of 40k where you never really get out from.
Once you get in, you never leave.
Yeah, once you're there, you never leave. That's one thing I certainly learned about Warhammer. So, yeah, and I started playing back around last March. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but I did have some experience with other card games, so I wasn't really super new to the whole concept. But the whole idea of warlords having their own attack and just bashing your face was really new to me, and warlords having different HPs. But I really liked the whole idea because it was something new, it was something different. And yeah, I slowly started, watching some people I could find on YouTube. Mostly it was, Scuff D, Skypoint, Ep6, and anybody else that I could really find. And, slowly I started to see that this game really had a cozy little community. Everybody was very responsive on Discord. I really liked it. But then I thought to myself, why not make more content so that new players have access to the decks easily? I mean, of course, you can get on Discord and everybody is going to tell you everything you want to know. But it's always also nice to have some content on YouTube so that you can just get there. You can just, write down, for example, Magnus the Red deck, and something pops up. So that just makes everybody's life a bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, I think that it's very important that we share all of this with each other, because at the end of the day, we're the ones playing the game, right? So the more knowledgeable the community itself is, the better it is for us, because it's more fun that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I understand. I mean, especially some folks like to keep their secrets, their deck list private or whatever, if they've got like a hot new build. But ultimately, without spread it out there to the other players, whether that's new players coming in so they understand why certain builds are getting played, or why certain warlords are popular, or it's just to expand the horizons, to do, hey, here's if there's 100 warlords out there, and I don't think there's deck lists for all of them. I mean, there's deck lists for quite a few of them, and many of those are outdated depending on patches, so there's always going to be that void to kind of get those decks out there and get those creative fires stoked in players' minds to think like, oh yeah, I could play that. I don't have all those cards, but let me try working with something like that. So I don't think there's anything wrong. I think that's one of the best things about doing the content is putting it out there and hoping people look into it, and it plants the seeds, so to speak, in terms of for a player.
Another fun thing of content, because I know you do this, Physics, is the hidden stuff that you only really see if you play a certain warlord, such as special interactions. I didn't know most of them, but you've got an entire just playlist of just different interactions that are unique. So I was able to see all of the ones I've never ran into that way, and that's always cool to see.
Oh yeah, that was like one of the things that I think is pretty important and something that a lot of people like. So first of all, I would like to thank once again Mr. Bunn for providing me with the voice files, because I did not extract them myself. I just made them into a video and uploaded them. So big thanks for that help. I think that this is very important, because I myself always enjoyed these interactions, hidden secrets inside every game. I really like that. It also gives a bigger flavor to what I think that EG does extremely well, because one of the things that I really enjoy in Horus Heresy Legions, of course there are some problems, but one of the things that I really enjoy is how actually the factions are kind of done in terms of creating the whole feel of that faction as it is in the Warhammer lore. I usually really like it how it's done, and all of these interactions also give a bit of a more spice to all of that, and I'm sure that a lot of people enjoy listening to those things, because it's kind of satisfying your Warhammer 40k addiction pretty much.
Yeah, and there's so many characters that have got those interactions. Like, I think Lorgar's got probably the most voice interactions with all the Primarchs out there, because he's such a talker, he's such a chatty Cathy, but it adds that whole layer, and especially if it's a warlord who's not getting played. Up until recently, Lorgar wasn't getting played. I mean, like, you could discover those, but it's the nice little hidden gems, or like when there's event warlords. I know we had Astalin and Galadan, and they had their own unique interactions with some of the characters too, as well as each other. And they kind of tell a story, or they make people question. I think when we were having that event where you have to choose between Astalin and Galadan for the first time, there's quite a lot of people who didn't know the lore behind either of those characters, asking like, who are these guys? Like, what's the deal with them? And hopefully that was, either as a cause of that, or that kind of helped spark that fire, as opposed to it's just a faceless warlord. This guy's a 35 hit point, this guy's a 30 hit point warlord, and they do different abilities. Now there's a little bit more personality, because the Horus Heresy is like lore deep. I mean, the 40k universe is lore deep, but in terms of how they've established the setting, because even before it was a ongoing series, it was tied into the 40k lore. It's so deep in there, and there's so much history with all the characters, so it's nice to see that they do dive into it.
Mm-hmm. So it's expansive universe.
Oh yeah. Well, you talked about just recently getting started with 40k. Between 40k and Heresy, do you have a favorite faction, favorite army that you like to play?
Oh yeah. So I'm stuck between two when it comes to favorites. So I got one in Loyalists and one in Traitors, basically. So I am collecting Blood Angels. I got a small army. They're certainly one of my favorites, but I would say a bit more inclined towards the Thousand Suns, because I don't know, I just really love the whole tragic lore that surrounds the Thousand Suns. It's always something that is debatable. There are so many sides into the whole thing that happened, basically, and all of that's the battle you usually have, saying some people saying that Magnus did nothing wrong, some people saying that he did something wrong, some saying that he did everything wrong, and it's pretty awesome, because I really love Magnus with all of his flaws. And funny thing is, you usually have Thousand Suns fans, or at least it's my understanding, because most of them that I know really despise Space Wolves, but I really can't bring myself to do that, because I don't know, I really also kind of feel Leman Russ. They say that he's like despite being a savage executioner, basically, I still see his love for his brothers in a lot of moments. So it's like during when he has a fight with Horus, during when basically he's extremely mad at Jagatai, I remember that moment. And even when before he actually descends on to basically annihilate Prospero, even the moments there, I still catch that soft spot in Leman Russ, which I really like, despite all of his savage image.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think I haven't gotten yet to the Lone Wolf or Wolfsbane, where he confronts Horus, but I've seen that in the books, and I think the way they've written him, he is savage, he's aggressive, but you get the sense, even when he's descending on Prospero, that he really doesn't want it to go the way that it's going. Like, even when he has that fight with Angron, and it's more of he's trying to teach him a lesson than it is like humiliate him. It's like, look, you're a wild dog, and in the course of this fight, you've lost the war. Like, this is not okay. I don't want to do to you what I may have to do to you. And I do think sometimes that kind of either gets buried or forgotten, and especially with the way that they've super ramped up the wolves part of the Space Wolves in 40K over the last few years.
That pisses me off.
When I started playing, the Space Wolves were much more just Vikings in space. It was like Vikings 40K, and I enjoyed the wolf totem aspect and kind of get into it, but they get further and further into the whole wolf thing, and there's just the imagery that goes with the Space Wolves. Like, because of that, you lose that savagery, whereas, don't get me wrong, the Vikings were pretty savage in their own right, but there's the strange kind of almost like nobility that goes with that image, as opposed to wolf sled or Santa wolf, or I don't know.
The wolf lords that work with the wolf priests.
Yeah, it's just too much.
So bad. I liked when they were the Vikings instead of the wolf.
So with the Thousand Suns being one of your faves, and the Blood Angels, how do you feel they do within the scope of the game?
Well, I really, really love how I'll start with Thousand Suns. So I really love how they are actually done. When I started this game, I remember what I was aiming for was just to gather a Magnus deck. That was like my main goal. But I did not have any Thousand Suns Warlords apart from Fozist Car, and I gotta say I really enjoyed playing him. Even though he's like very underrated and underused, I really, really I really enjoyed how he was played. Then I remember I got Amon, and then I got Ahriman, and finally I had Magnus. But in general, I really like the whole idea of that different resource that they have, like the psychic power. And it's like you're not only using your energy to play some truths, but you're also playing around that psychic energy, which really reflects really well the whole, the psychic affinity of the Thousand Suns Legion. And apart from that I really like the fact that most of their units, well, I would say units that are well used at least, have a lot of utility, like the Cabal. Then you have like Izakar Or, and that's some pretty good stuff. However, there is one thing I despise about how the Thousand Suns are made. One thing, and that is that, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think that a big portion of their Astartes are just terrible. I never use them, and I think they're like unusable.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir, friend. They are.
I have to agree with you, and I think I mean that they got scaled back pretty hard after that initial release because stat wise. Honestly, I think stat-wise, their Astartes were very much the same stats, health and attack-wise. But they took all hit because most, if not all of them, were Psyker 1, Psyker 2, so the Psyker aspect could really ramp up really fast, a lot faster than I think EG realized. So then they took that down, but they didn't change anything with regards to the stats of the troops. And there were some that are useful. Like, I really enjoy hidden ones. I think they're like precognition on a troop is not to be not to be overlooked. Like, that can be devastating, especially if you can get like quick blood on them and really set them up. They're a nice troop and they're strong enough where they can cause damage for a couple turns. But they don't have anything else going for them. Their ability is terrible, and they don't have Psyker, so they don't bring anything else to the board, so they easily get overlooked. And as a player, like, I think a lot of people realize that, like, Phosis Tagar is a perfect example of a warlord who can operate very well with neutrals, Helios Mortar characters, Sagittarius Squad, Devourer of Worlds, whatever you want to mix in there, and use those barriers to buy you some time. And you can take that and put that in any Thousand Suns. Ahriman was a prime example of that when that was getting run a couple months ago. It's still getting run rather well effectively because of his special card that got added. But even before that, he could give precognition to those units, and you've got a Jubok that your opponent can't attack, can't flank, can't fast. And you're going to just profit the entire game. And that's neutrals that are doing the work. It's not necessarily the Astartes. Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of Astartes. Like, I would love to see at least 3 or 4 more of their Astartes actually viable, whether that's with an ability or just better stats, that'd be nice.
Yeah, some are just, I don't know, extremely bad. Like, for example, the one that takes the cake is the Besenmut squad for me, because having a flank unstoppable 2-3 for 3 just doesn't cut it for me. I mean, I really don't understand the idea of that unit at all.
Yeah, compared to some of the other flankers that exist in the game, like, okay, so it's got unstoppable, but it doesn't have an attack to do much. What is the point here? Is there more to it? I think I don't know. I like it because if you look at their Psyker abilities, right? They've got Quick Blood, and then they've got the I forget the name of the one that pulls it back into your hand and reduces the cost.
Warp Portal,
Portal, yes. Yeah. So you've got those two that actually play with your troops. The rest of them are damage dealing or, like copy a card. I think the copy a card one is probably the worst one out of all of them. But none of them do anything where it's like, I mean, Quick Blood is good. It's a nice stat boost, but it's 3. And if you're gonna waste your second turn making your flanker 4-5 to flank, it just seems counterproductive to any sort of momentum that you're trying to achieve with it. I don't know. I agree. It just feels like it's an understated card. If it was 3-3 or 3-2 unstoppable flanking, I'd be okay with it too. It'd be a little bit better.
Yeah, certainly. So that's pretty much the only problem I really have with the Thousand Suns. This was actually a bit of a meme, I remember, because back when I used to make mostly Thousand Suns videos, because when I started uploading, I was mostly focusing on Thousand Suns. The funniest comments that I usually got were saying that half of the video is like you just bashing on the Thousand Suns Astartes, saying how trash they are. And yeah, that pretty much was it. I was like, okay, you don't play this is trash. Okay, this is trash. But they do make up for it with a lot of things, though. For example, the Meketra Cabal is probably one of my favorite epic units. I cannot see a Thousand Suns deck without that card. It is just amazing.
Yeah. Meketra Cabal, like, I like the cost speeder and the legendaries, even Book of Magnus, which is debatable if you need to have it. Aside from Horned Raiment, I think all the legendary troops are really good.
Oh yeah, certainly. The only one I usually look down on is the Raiment. The rest I almost always use. And the only one I usually actually have under debate, I sometimes use it and sometimes I don't, is the one that gives you reflection for your Witchfire and other stuff.
Oh yeah, that one.
Sometimes I include, sometimes I don't. But Book, I usually include Book, at least on Ahriman and Magnus. Not sure about the others, though.
Yeah, you play like if you're playing Fosus Dakar, you really don't need to have any psyker abilities at that point. So you could totally scrap that entire thing and just use your energy for barriers. It's a little bit of a gamble. I like to have at least an Ashen Blow, but he plays pretty well with all the other cards at his disposal.
Oh yeah, certainly, and he also has the the cheese with the Slayer of Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get it in your hand, it's really easy to then just play it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As for the Blood Angels, though, I really gotta say, first of all, I really love the Requiem mechanic that they gave them. I think this really does kind of play into the lore because all of that moment with when Sanguinius falls to Horus and the whole Legion pretty much feels a psychic backlash, and when you mix of this psychic and emotional backlash, it kind of does represent, I think, the Blood Angels really well. So I really like what they have done with that. And apart from that, I really do like the Legion itself. I mean, I'm sure it did have some problems when it was released. I remember it received a buff really, really soon. But I really do like the fact that they can be played in many different ways. I mean, and their warlords are pretty viable as well. I mean, some more than the others, but I've seen a lot of very strong Raldoron decks or Sanguinius decks. I've even seen the Sanguinary Guard Captain being played a lot lately with some cheesy combos.
Oh, you're talking to Scuff, the man who says you can make him work.
I love Ascalon. I love using him, and then you get his ability, and you get a drill sight, and then you throw it on your troop with landing, and you give him a stealth, and you just double up on it, and then you go into the last stand mode. Like, I'd put that deck out. I was planning that deck when we were deciding if he was going to come out or not. I was like, okay, if we're getting a guy who can protect my drop pods from any sort of flanking, this is going to be good. I enjoy Ascalon a lot. I think.
Yeah, and
I was going to say, I think he's got a limit. I think he could probably hit 38, maybe 3,900. I don't know. Because Knights are out there and they can put some pressure at that late game. But yeah, he's nice.
Yeah, the only thing that I kind of dislike about him is his voice acting, which just gets on my nerves really, really fast.
It's very...
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, it's like Shakespeare in the Park. Like a very, this guy thinks he's being an actor. I don't know.
I am Master of the Sanguinary God.
Master of the Sanguinary God.
Sanguinary God. Yeah, something like that. Certainly. And yeah, Meros is also pretty good. I mean, I gotta admit that his ability seems to be kind of inferior to, for example, what the Apothecary from the Raven Guard has.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of. Extra stuff.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Requiem and remove stun and poison is pretty cool.
Yeah, he's one of the few that can remove poison. And that is something that, because they added that. That wasn't initial. They added that when they changed up Corebacks on release. And it has its purpose, especially with the resurgence of Death Guard, kind of, where I've seen a lot more people playing Typhon, and not so much Garrow, although Garrow got changed a little bit too, but with the poison aspect has been ramped up an awful lot, and there's Mortarion, and there's Miros, and I don't think there's any other warlord who removes poison. There's a lot of other cards that do, but as far as having it on demand, and he'd be like, no, I'm going to keep that troop. Like, your poison ability means nothing to me.
Some days I forget that. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. You say it and then...
I was going to say, some days I forget Mortarion can remove poison and stun. So, because I'm so used to him just stunning my warlord over and over again.
Oh, yeah. I remember, planning that, now I'm going to stun his shroud, and then I'm suddenly, oh, yeah, no, you're not doing that.
And then he takes it off. Yeah, you have to stun both of them to make it work effectively.
Yeah.
I remember, and it still is interesting to me that we have so few cards that remove stun in the game, and it's been around for a very long time. It's a lot less prevalent at the current moment because I think Alpha Legion are kind of on a I'd say decline, but they're not getting played right now as much. But stunning, there's so many cards that do it in every faction, and there's only 4 cards, and one of those is a warlord who can remove stun. It's pretty crazy when you think about it.
Yes, as far as stun removal goes, I do remember one of the cards that I really struggled to get actually until it appeared in the shop, and that was Pi Alpha.
Oh yes,
and that's such a good card though. I mean, does so much: heal, remove stun, and leaves a body on the board as well. So I really do enjoy.
Yeah, since a
that card.
Mechanicum troop works well for Mechanicum decks, and yeah.
Yeah, and I remember back when I wanted to get that card, there really weren't a lot of the new neutral cards that are in the game right now. So there was a lot of space in my Magnus deck to include those guys. I even include them now, but right now they do have some contenders. So yeah, but it's just a great card overall. So yeah, I really do like how the Blood Angels are basically done in the game. And another thing that I do really, really enjoy is that they do have a couple of different play styles. Like you can get the Hermia Blood Angels, basically focus on giving them drop pods. You can play them for Last Stand. You can play, for some late game as well with some heavy units. So yeah, I think they're pretty cool.
Yeah.
Quite viable too, which is always nice.
I agree. It's always nice to, and then all their warlords have a distinct feel, which is nice. I like that where you're not just like, well, this warlord is the same but better. Like with 35 hit points or a higher initiative, they all kind of fit a different mold, a different aspect of the Legion. So,
all right, very nice.
Yeah,
and I actually one of the topics that is for today, as we said, something that you mentioned a minute ago also ties really well into that. So you said that some, each deck has some limit, like, right? For example, 380, 3,900 or whatever.
Right.
And yeah, I really do agree with most decks. I think even with the most quote unquote subpar warlords, it is really possible to get to around that rank. It only becomes very meta dependent when you get into the top 50 ranking, I think. So
I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely agree.
And at that point, you're playing a different game altogether because you're playing not just a game of trying to win, but you're playing a game where you have to grind it out. So you have to win quickly and as often as possible. And I think if you were to take any deck, and I mean, when I was doing up ladder up until last year, I would do that with the deck. I would just play 5 games, 5 daily wins, easy enough. Win with this deck 5 times every day through the course of the entire month, and you would end up at 39, 4,000. I think there's a couple months where I broke like 42, but ladder was much higher. Like top 50 was like a much higher scoring, and that was just with consistent 5 wins. But it is hard when you get to that point, and now you're facing, and you have to make those changes because you get to that 39, 4,000 mark, and now you're facing everybody who is battling for top 50, and they're using the 5 or 6 high win rate, high speed rate warlords, and there are just some decks that you can win, but it's gonna be harder for you, or you can win, but you're only gonna get 1 or 2 wins in per loss, so your climb is going to be much slower. Not to mention the points that you're gaining per win versus losing can throw things off. There's so many factors in there, so it like the higher you go, the harder the climb is, and some of that is because there's a completely different game being played at the top 50 level.
Oh yeah, that's certainly true. That is why I usually find myself stopping around like 3,800 to like 4,100, and then I usually don't attempt to compete even. Because, I really do like to play around with some warlords like Abaddon and Sevatar and whatever, and you cannot do that.
Right.
There.
No.
Not at all. I was just gonna say about how I love playing like off meta things that work around low Terra. Like hell, I got 1,000 games of Argyle Tall. Some of the most fun I've ever had in this game.
Yeah, you can play test and practice. And I don't know. I think the way it's currently set up is if you're in practice at 3,800, 4,000, the game tries to match you with somebody around that ranking, even in practice mode. So you've got to have bots off, and then it could take forever for you to find a match. I think the lower you are, closer to 25 to 2,800, it's easier to find matches in practice mode. And you're going to get people doing challenge decks, but you're going to get a lot more people just either playing those off-brand warlords, whether that's playing for fun or that's what they've got, or they're testing new things. And especially when we get a new warlord or a new faction out, you see a lot of that, much more so in practice, as people are play testing the new toys, so to speak. And So you get your deck together. You've built your deck, you've created your deck, you've got your idea, and then you go out to play test it. Do you go into practice first? Like, I want to get your guys' opinions on this. Do you go directly into practice first? Do you run it through against your own decks in the practice versus AI mode? Or do you reach out to your lodge mates and try to practice with them?
Well, here's what I usually do. I do two of those. So either I play with some lodge mates or some friends to just check it out. But the thing that I usually do the very first, once I finish the deck, and once I think, okay, now I think this is complete, I'm going to see how it does, I usually just go into ranked. I do that for a couple of reasons. So first is that, I really don't, as I said, I'm really not trying to compete. So it's not a problem if I lose him in like 10 games in a row. So I don't really mind that. And apart from that, when going into ranked, I kind of am able to see the limit of the deck. Not only see the limit of the deck, but when I usually build a new deck, of course I include some of the cards that I think that are a must include. For example, if it's Thousand Suns deck, I of course include the Cabal, whatever. Some of the neutrals that you really, really want to include, like for example, Ambassador Milgator, there's like 90% of decks. But then I also think about maybe what do I need to include that kind of ties into the current meta, right? So if you're seeing a lot of Conrad and a lot of, for example, Orphans of War, of course, you really do want to think about that anti-stealth option. And if, for example, you are seeing a lot of Knights, that actually does change what you do. Because, for example, I recently uploaded a Jagatai deck, a new one, and it includes a lot more fast units compared to the old one I had, because now you really need that fast damage just so to remove their weapons. So yeah, that is one of the reasons I usually go into the rank straight up, just to see what exactly extra I need to include there just to deal with what people are playing right now.
Oh, go ahead, Axel. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you're going to chime in.
Yeah, I was about to chime in. I like to test it out against like one of the hard bots, because those guys can be buggers. Like those guys can be absolute assholes. You know the ones I'm talking about, where you can practice either against your own deck or a random one. That's almost always a Primarch. And after that, usually it works, because those bots are also dumb. I'll test it out in like a good 1 to 5 practice matches. Just somewhere in that range, depending on the feel of the deck, if I can really get the feel. And then I'll toss in some ranked matches, because I don't play a lot of ranked, because at this point, I don't see a point to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, ranked is ranked. I mean, you can get some out of it. I play it for a few points to get the crate at the end of the season, but you can play it to prove either, if you're going for top 50, or if you want to reach Terra. There's a lot of players who still haven't reached Terra who are looking to get that, but at a certain point, like, I just get tired of like climbing, month starts, reset over again. Then you go through the first week where everybody's playing, Angron and Karn or Kabanda or whatever, aggro Knights to pump up and get up there. It's like a weird race, and I'd rather just play whatever I feel like for the day, with all the different warlords. Mm-hmm. When I'm doing, I just go right into, like, I build a deck and I'll go into practice and I'll just play like 10 or 15 games with it. After like the first 3 or 4, I'll see what cards I'm not feeling based off of how the games have gone. I'll switch up things. After 5 or 6 more games, I'll look and see like, okay, all those games I've played so far, are there any cards here that I'm just not using? And then are they really necessary? And then, and within the scope of that, I mean, I always include those go-tos, whether that's anti-stealth or anti-stun removal, or if it's something that I find that, the deck really needs, if it's an aggressive warlord and I need more healing, or if it's more, I need more protection for this warlord. And then I just go from there and I just keep play testing and evolving. Despite the fact that, I've got access to a huge, lodge community, I really don't reach out to duel or play test with my lodge mates that often. And I think that's something, I don't know, it's hard to say, because it depends on where you live. We've got players all over the world. I know I've got quite a few players in my lodge that are in different time zones, that they're awake when I'm sleeping and vice versa. So that makes it a little bit hard. And I'm just more that kind of person where I just rather do the work on my own. I've pitched ideas, and sometimes, like in the course of a Discord, here's my deck list. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm feeling from playing my games. I'd like to tweak some cards, or I think there's a couple cards here I'm not satisfied with, and you get some feedback. But I don't get a lot of time to actually like, hey, let's go ahead and play this deck out a whole lot. So I mean, when you talked about that physics, where you get some games in with your lodge mates. Are they on the same time zone with you? Do you guys like work that out, or is it just kind of, hey, somebody's online and you just hit the little dual icon and go from there?
Yeah, that's usually how I do it. So I check if somebody's just there. I just issue a challenge and just wait if somebody accepts it. If nobody accepts it, I'll just straight go into normal games.
Gotta get those games in somehow.
Yeah, and usually when it comes to ranked, actually, mostly, right now for the last couple of months, I haven't been playing as much as I really used to. All this stuff. But usually I play either to do the daily missions or to just do a video. And, after like a week or so, I usually do get to the rank around like 3.8 or something doing these decks, because it's usually very rare for a warlord to be in such a bad spot that you cannot really get to, around 3,000, even with like a new deck. I mean, as long as you're putting your brain into it, I think you can do it with any warlord. So.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, yeah.
I think any warlord can get up there, and most of them don't take a lot of effort. They just take the commitment. And I think the big thing with that is, and that kind of ties into playtesting, is the commitment to a deck. Because sometimes I see it a lot where people try something, they lose 2 or 3 times, and they give up on the warlord. They say, this isn't working, or in their mind it confirms their bias as far as why this warlord is junk, as opposed to diving in and seeing what's not working for you, what are you going for, whether it's asking for feedback or if it's just becoming more familiar with the deck itself. I think one of the you can't teach it. You can just explain it and hope people catch on to it. But I mean, the more time you spend playing a warlord, playing a deck, knowing a deck inside and out, that gives you such a huge advantage when you get to that point, and just through the course of a game, you're like, okay, I've got 10 cards left in my deck. 2 of those are my hard removal options that haven't come up yet. And I know my opponent has got whatever they're playing, and I need that. I've got a card draw. I haven't seen, these 2-3 cards yet, or I've already played that card, so that option is completely dead to me. I can't rely on that. I have to shift my play based off of what tools I still have available to me. How can I close out this game? And that takes time and commitment to a deck, and building the deck and not constantly changing it or not constantly stepping away from it to get to that level. But if you have that, you could go very high with it, because you've controlled the factors, but then you finally understand the factors that are involved in your deck, and that, I think, lets you play at a higher level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also very important, in my opinion, that when you are making a deck, one of the things that you usually really need to take into consideration, apart from all the very important stuff like having enough card draw and a good curve and whatever, is making your deck be somewhat consistent. I mean, I know that this is a card game, and of course, at the end of the day, it is going to be probability, but there are many ways to kind of reduce that probability, right? So, for example, if you do not have your deck overloaded with stuff that you really don't want to get at the early stages but want to get at the late stages, it's going to make it much easier for you. And that's actually why some of the decks are much easier to build. For example, if I remember once the World Eaters received the rework, I just randomly built a Shabrandar deck that I play to this day, because I've done like a lot of 11 zeros on that deck easily. And that's simply because making World Eaters into a consistent deck is very easy. Like, you put a lot of aggressive troops and you just phase bash your opponent to death. But with some other warlords, it's kind of difficult. For example, when I first made a Magnus deck, it was really, really bad, because I had a lot of late game troops. I had a lot of focus on my whispers, but I never really had into consideration the fact that I was running out of cards, that I was not getting anything for my early game. And that's really takes some experience to kind of fix, especially when it comes to control-based warlords and not like, for example, more aggressive ones that are very straightforward.
Yeah, and you mentioned Shabandar. I know you've played Shabandar quite a bit since he was revamped, and I think you got a couple videos there kind of breaking down how you can control his pings, and which I agree. As far as once they reworked Shabandar, he became superior to Karn by all rights in the fact of how he can ping your opponent to death much more effectively and make better use of those troops. But I want to get your take on it because I liked old Shabandar a lot more. I liked his ability as it was, with his, deal 2 damage to the enemy warlord and 1 to adjacent units. Just as an aside, how do you feel between the two of those? Which do you prefer?
Well, this is what I actually think about that. So when it comes to prefer, I would say depends on what I mean by prefer. So the old one I certainly enjoyed more. And that is because he was the only World Eater's warlord that you could actually play as, well, in my opinion, as pure board control and not extreme aggro.
Mm-hmm.
So you could play him by just controlling the board and then playing some of the World Eater's card that you usually wouldn't play on any of the other ones. Because, well, Erlen has to be extremely aggressive, Karn has to be extremely aggressive, and Engron doesn't even get a choice. He has to be extremely aggressive because you just can't, you don't decide that. I even had an idea, I remember, to make a meme deck called Engron the Pacifist. The whole idea was getting Athame and just doing Survivor instead of hitting the enemy warlord, but that's when Athame was actually reworked, so that idea was scrapped. But, well, when it comes to preferring as a more effective warlord, then, yeah, obviously the new Dar is much stronger, on paper, but I really did not enjoy the fact that they kind of gutted the only control warlord that the World Eaters had. That's a fact.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like, I loved Old Dar, and just like for the reasons you said, he was a board control warlord. You had the option. He could push it to be aggressive if you wanted to, but you could throw in there 3 or 4 of the troops that the World Eaters didn't use. They don't have too many good ones, but there's a few good combinations there using Sedition's Gate with Nisr Scouts. Just ways to kind of keep the damage consistent over the course of the game, but also limit your opponent's ability to put any sort of troops down. While he has the ability to do a lot more damage now, especially with the change to how some of those troops work and the ping troops, and he can kind of control that, it did totally shift him out of that mode where now he's just another variant aggressive warlord, and I was sad that happened. So I just wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, that's certainly my position as well. The thing that I really did enjoy, though, is the change to the hidden strength, because now it's a very good card. It used to be kind of a par.
Yes, yeah, hidden strength got good. I think I still like the Lork squad. I've always liked Lork squad. I'm sad though that Armor of Mars took the hit that it did. I understand why, but at the same time, I don't feel like they changed enough within the rest of the faction to feel counter to that. And I still am at a loss as far as why they have not changed Macer Varen, because that guy has not gotten played. Like, I know there's a couple people who like, well, I play Macer Varen. Do you really though? Like, nobody plays Macer Varen. Like, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, that is one of those cards that doesn't really see any play. I really don't remember if I've ever even seen the guy being played. It's like, if it was, for example, when a friendly troop gets damaged, no, then it sounds much better. But when a friendly troop dies, doesn't really sound that good, because that means that if in an event that you don't have anything on the board, the best you can do is that plus the land speeder, which is going to be 10 energy tool and not worth it.
I would rather his ability be when a friendly troop dies, reduce the cost of this card by 2, and then he has like rage, gain +1/+1. Pretty basic, but you have the option to maybe throw down a big fat unit early on or late game for cheap. But
Oh, yeah,
I
that would-
forgot that was even a card.
yeah, so many people do. It's like for them, like the legendaries stop at Argus Brond, and then they forget about Gorefather and Macer Varen.
Can you blame them?
No,
I
can't.
remember Argus Brond and that one guy whose name is now escaping me. The one that puts
Wrath?
down the he's a P2.
Yeah.
Wrath. That's the only ones I can remember.
Yeah, because those are the ones that you usually see.
That's it. And the Wrath used to be a 4/3.
Ooh,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
scary.
yeah. He was a 4/3, and the units he created were 5/5s. So you can understand why they've been hesitant to change them back. But anyway, I don't know how we got talking about Shabradar 100% or world leaders in general. But yeah, there's a good example there though, where like you said, like consistency and understanding the consistency. I think within the deck and what you can do, and if you can control those factors in the course of a game with an ability or troops that help fuel that ability. Like just talking with rule leaders, you've got Rage and you've got the Shevendar with all the cards that ping, whether that's the bikes, the Keth bikes, or Strike and Fade. There's a consistency there. I think the same kind goes with a faction. Oh gosh, I just had it off the top of my head. The Defenders of Caliban and their consistency with the duplicitous trait. And if you build your deck with all of your troops being duplicitous or gain duplicitous or making use of that, it really frustrates your opponent more beyond just like, oh, it's a one play, I can't do anything. It's like if every one of your plays has got that, or if you're playing Blood Angels and you play Hermia, and you're making your drop pods harder and consistently they're 3 health, they're 4 health, that consistency all ties in and makes it much more effective for you to get what you want to get, whether that's landing or a big beefy troop, assault, or a big burst of damage with a end game scenario like behind enemy lines, whatever the case may be. Some of those factors you can control in game, but it all comes down to playing it out and testing and building your deck with that in mind.
Yeah, I do remember the thing that really pushed me when I started playing. I remember one of the few first golden warlords I got was Conrad. Then there was Fulgrim, and then there was Engron. And when I got Engron, I was just bashing my way easily to like 4,000, saying that, why would you play something else? And then I remember one of the players that used to play, what's that warlord called again? Kelborhal, the one from the Heirs of Ahriman.
Yes, Crow Delacroix.
Yeah, that's the guy. So I remember, I lost once, I lost twice, like 4 times, and I was like, okay, so maybe it's not like I thought. Maybe you could actually take warlords like these into higher, level of gameplay. And then that's when I actually started getting interested in all of these off-meta warlords.
Yeah, Crow has made a career out of playing neutral warlords, especially Mechanicum warlords, to very high efficiency. And Fail, Kelberhal, Decima, those guys work, but you have to know how to use them, and you have to build for efficiency. And if you do, and you put the time in, I think they can surprise people very easily. The first time you have a mercenary survive with that escape vent, and then they just get like 15 Mechadrites dumped on them or whatever. It's not pretty.
Yeah, that's scary as hell.
Yeah. Well, with talking with facing up against players in the ladder or practice or matchup you kind of mentioned like that kind of changed your perception or gave you some different ideas. Do you ever go for something that you've seen versus an opponent where that like gives you a light bulb moment where you're like, oh, I should be doing this with this deck, or I should try playing that warlord and try that trick and see if I can make it better or make that my own? Do you ever have one of those moments?
Oh yeah, I think it's something that happens very, very often. Like when I see a certain type of deck and when I play against my opponents, even if, for example, they don't score a win, sometimes I just notice that this is a very interesting deck idea. For example, I remember there was this one guy, he was playing Fozist Car, and he had a combo with those cultists that actually get buffed every single time those psychic barriers die.
Oh, the Cygnus Fanatics, right?
Fanatic, yeah. So he had a acolyte-based Fozist car with, of course, the Slayer of the Worlds as a final punch, and that was a pretty cool deck idea. And I really did want to make a video about a deck like that, but never really got to doing Fozist car. But I certainly have in my mind, for example, to try that out. And I remember also one of my favorite decks right now is Abaddon, actually, which I've been playing a lot lately. And that also originated from when I played against another player. I just, altered it a bit. So I played against an Abaddon, and I saw Sons of Horus for the first time being played with some heavier troops. So usually I would see either them playing tactics or them playing a lot of early game units to do pressure with Loken, for example. And I thought maybe I could make for example, a vehicle-based Abaddon, and I did, and I also squeezed in Desperate Defense, and now that is one of my go-to decks, actually. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, you never know where inspiration's going to come from. See, Axel, you should have done Fosis Takar in Violent Legions last night with the Cygnus Fanatics.
I refuse to play Takar for moral reasons.
I like Fosis Takar. Now, he had a downswing, I think, for a brief moment there when the barriers dealt damage to the Warlord, because that was like a terrible idea. But I like that idea too, that the Cygnus Fanatic as a whole has opened up some different paths when it was added to the game. I think I've used it in Astalon, because you can destroy one of your friendly infantry units and beef them up. It works kind of well if you time it right with Falk, although it's harder to do. And then I think there was another warlord that I had that was like making use of destroying your own infantry. It escapes me right now. It was like a really nice early play. Oh, Ingathel could juice him up, but then she could also include some of the cheaper, like the stealth guys early on, so then you play them, play a mark on them, attack with the 3/1 stealth troop, then they get stronger, and right out the gate they're a troop that their stats may be too high for Melgator to return to your hand. So now you've got a really nasty low cost Cygnus Fanatic, and then you just go from there with like Nurglings and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there is also another thing apart from inspiration. So let's say you're not playing against something new, but rather something that is very often used. For example, let's say something is in the meta, and you see that a lot of people are actually playing that. It is also a good idea to try and play that yourself a couple of times, just so that you know how to play against it, because usually it's very important to know how something plays in order to know what weaknesses it has, right? So when you're the pilot, you actually know all the weaknesses. So
yes, I agree. That's a big thing between understanding your opponent and like what cards that are at their disposal, how they would most likely use them. If I was playing that warlord, what would I be doing in this turn? What would I likely have? What can I expect that they're going to throw at me? That definitely ties into that. And then it kind of factors in, because sometimes there'll be folks who are on the Discord or in general global chat, crying out for balance changes or nerfs, and they don't play the faction. And it's like, until you play the faction, you can't really say something isn't working for you, or you're not satisfied with the way it looks, or you're having a hard time against it. Until you play it and understand the nuances of playing it, you can't really ask for it to be changed. I think there sometimes are clear cut, hey, this is just straight up overpowered. Like the flame cannon for the knights on day one, right? It was bonkers. But there are those other ones.
Day one Canis.
Yeah. Day one Canis is pretty brutal. But there are those games where every night you see people like, oh, this is just powerful. This like Jagtai Khan, like, well, okay, yeah, like if he gets to the Warhawk, he could have a hard time, but he's not by any means overpowered. He has to get there. And on top of that, like if you don't know what you're going up against, if you're not playing Warhawk and you know that he's got a clock, then you're making a mistake. Then that's kind of falls on you as the opponent.
Yeah, that is true, because a lot of parts, in being successful with your deck, is also the fact that knowing how to play against specific matchups. For example, let's say if you are playing against Jagatai, and normally you never face bash with your warlord, well, you would understand that this might be the case where you do, because you know that he has a very strong late game if he does manage to get all his buffs with his reckoning. And that is exactly why you need to be aggressive now. You should not just be, let's say you're playing Magnus and you don't play the aggressive Magnus. You like to put on like Forge Complex and just play for the late game. I really enjoy late game Magnus, but if you see that it's Jagatai, well, then it's time to start bashing, because at a certain point, he's going to become so strong that your board is not going to cut it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's your fault if you did not take that into consideration. And another thing is, for example, before it was adjusted, there was always like Targutai sacrifice. So it's your fault if you put all of your resources simultaneously on the board so that he can just get rid of everything with a single card.
Man, that makes me sad. See, we're talking about cards that have been changed. Targetai Sacrifice. I still play it as a one of, and I think they could still rework it where it does 1 damage per unit. It's pretty hard dealing 2 damage per unit, but that was a card a lot of people would have that outcry about too. It's like, oh, it's terrible, it's broken. Well, first off, if you play the White Scars, you realize that it's synergistic to their faction. Sure, it returns all the cards back to your deck, and it's 0. They cost 0. But if you draw your cards back again, that's it. That's what they got. They might have that hard removal tactic, but that was their banking, was putting all those cards back in your deck. And there was games I played, especially against Death Guard. They had lots of frontline. Well, White Scars don't have a whole lot of unstoppable. As a matter of fact, I don't think they have any unstoppable. They're all so frontline is their big weakness. So I returned like the Imperial Reaper and a Halden Tal to the deck, and it was like 2 large cost troops, and then they used defensive maneuver, drew them back and threw them down for free, plus another 2 frontline troops. And it's like, okay, all right. I think that's the risk you run. That's the whole point of that card. It's not unbalanced. Is it frustrating? Sure, but if you knew what you're facing, then you run the risk and you make those decisions based off of that. And maybe he was holding that defensive maneuver for just that play. I don't know. It worked out for him, though.
Yeah, well, of course, there was that downside in everything becoming 0 cost, obviously. Yeah. You said a very important thing, I think, which is there is something that is frustrating and there is something that is overpowered. So let's say, for me, Battle Cannon might be frustrating to play against, but it doesn't mean that Battle Cannon outright has to be nerfed into the ground or something. But Flame Cannon, on the other hand, that was clearly overpowered.
Yeah.
It could just annihilate everything. So that's the difference.
That is a difference. And I mean, the Knights are already still in a touchy spot. I think there's still things that could be fixed. But yeah, I had games in the first week with Flame Cannon where I shared in my lounge, was like, the game should not be like this. I should not take down and be at 40 HP and take down a Ferrous Manus to 0 with a Flame Cannon. There's Saul Tarvet's Desperate Defense build. I think somebody threw down, they had 8 health, 9 health troops, and in one turn through the course of using Flame Cannon and a Battle Cannon, like some other weapon, like I wiped their entire board. Plus they already had like a troop on the board. Like, this shouldn't be possible with one card. Like, that's clearly overpowered. Battle Cannon is, it's a pain. It punches you for 3. It costs plasma. It's powerful, but it's not overpowered. I do think that juggling the ability that the game currently has, where you can put Battle Cannon, use all 3 of those in the same arm slot, I wish that would change, but that's not the card's fault. That's the current mechanics of the Knights as a whole.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a difference between a mechanic in the game being a problem versus a card being a problem.
Right.
So that's something that used a lot.
Yep.
For example, let's say, and I remember there was a lot of rant back in the day about Conrad as well, but then people just started including anti-stealth.
Yeah.
It was not. Maybe not waste it on their recon claw and just keep it to one shot and later.
It's a simple fix. It was. I mean, there's always going to be those complaints or the people who are like, I keep losing to this deck, but I'm not making any changes to my deck. Why am I losing? Like, we had that when Corvus Corax came out, and the Raven Guard really made use of stealth. Like, stealth already existed in the game, but it was like on lower, weaker cards, or like you would get it from a Mark of Tzeentch, and it was, something maybe that would be nice. But this was a faction that finally made use of it, and then you had a warlord who could get it, and so many people would be so upset about that. Like, well, at the time there was like 3-4 cards that removed stealth, and nobody used them unless they were Raven Guard, and then they would have that speeder. But there's options to get rid of the stealth, and then you just hold it for when you need to. And I go, oh no, I shouldn't have to put that card in my deck to play against this guy. Well, then you're gonna lose. Or you just play smarter. If you don't have that card, use a Mortar Strike. Use something else that's gonna still cause damage. Like, there's options, but you just got to be willing to step out your box and play test with it and what works. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to, anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's very important to see and really play test your decks just to see what people are playing right now. I mean, if that wasn't the case, your deck would always look the same. So if there was never a reason for you to include anti-stealth on your deck would always look the same. I mean, sometimes you need to include this, sometimes you need to include anti-stun, anti-poison, depending on what's going on. So if you're playing in a meta where, I don't know, let's say 5 out of 10 games is a Mortarion game, well, that's unlikely, but still, then you would certainly have 2 Pi Alphas in your deck. I mean, that would be 100%.
Well, that kind of ties into my next question, too, because it's like, for you guys, when does your tweaking stop? Like, do you ever settle on a build and you feel like this is it? I like it. I don't want to change. I'm okay with the losses I take because I don't cover this base. I like the deck as it is. Or do you continuously tweak here and there as you face certain matchups?
I don't move my decks around often. I don't really need to half the time. I find myself, whenever I make a new deck, it never occurs to me to put jam for some reason, and I always get the punch in the gut the minute I end up against a Death Guard a couple matches in. I go, oh yeah, that's something I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, well, I usually play a couple of games, and I take into consideration a few things. So I know sometimes, like what you mentioned right now, the game does like to play tricks on you, and that means, for example, you decide that today I am going to play Jagatai Khan. And the 3 opponents that you get, so 2 are Mortarion and 1 is Caleb, right? And you know that these guys are going to appear like 1 in 30 matches. So you do not say that, okay, my deck is terrible because I just lost to Caleb, which is basically something like a counter pick, right? So you also have to take into consideration that. So if you're facing a lot of counter matchups, you have to play a bit more. And apart from that, finally the tweaking kind of stops when I feel 2 things. When I feel that I'm not running out of cards, so there's enough card drawing the deck, so I consistently have something to play. And the second is I just don't get a feeling that something is missing, that something needs to be changed. I mean, one thing is losing, but the other is losing and saying, oh my God, this card is not doing for me, for example, doing it. So it needs to change.
Do you revisit your old builds after there's been expansions? Because I know that's something I do, but because I have a deck for every warlord, so I've got all the slots filled. I'm just going to shout that out there. My slots are filled. I still don't have Jagtai, but I've got everybody else. So when a new expansion comes out, and we finally get the new round of neutrals, I'll go back to my decks and I'll take a look at it and I'll be like, yeah, do I want to include any of these new neutrals in there? And just as a one night, I'll go through all of them all at once. And unless it's a new deck, new warlord that I'm building with the new neutrals already available to me, I don't go back that often to retweak or hey, you know what? I'm going to change up this Latara build and make her completely Cygnus Fanatics. I did that with my Lucretia, but I didn't do that with Latara. But do you do that often? Do you take, after there's been a new expansion, new neutrals, or even if there's a new card that's been come out from an event reward, for instance, do you go back I'm going to rework these 4 or 5 decks right away?
I usually don't. This is how it usually works for me. For example, if I'm feeling like playing, let's say, I don't know, Iron Hands today, I'm going to, of course, take my old deck and tweak something that's, maybe now I'll try to include some new cards, but not like, for example, expansion is now, I'm going to change everything.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are some things that instantly come into my mind, but there's usually one or two decks that this I have to try. For example, as soon as I got Lord Malkiel, I knew that I had to include it in my Abaddon because that, together with the counterattack, meant that unlike turn 2, you could potentially play Targost, and that's ugly as hell.
Yeah.
So sometimes I definitely tweak, but usually I just wait till I feel like playing the Warlord.
What about you, Axel?
Yeah, I'll wait afterwards and then try to make a special build towards it. For example, I had a lot of fun doing Cygnus Cultist Argel Tall, because I'd just ping my troops a bunch and just get the Cygnus Fanatic roided up, and that was amazing.
See, there's another
fun you can do.
Cygnus Fanatic is the shining star tonight. He's a lot of ways to play that guy.
And it's like one of those cards that when somebody plays, doesn't seem to be that much of a threat, but then you slowly start to understand that, okay, that cannot stay, because now suddenly it's a 5-3 instead of 1-3. So
he quickly gets out of hand. He gets pretty angry, especially if they're throwing in like flanking troops, or they've already got low health troops that turn. Yeah. And then he fully heals. So like that's why I like him with Ingethel, because if she's given him marks and his health goes up to 6, he fully heals that. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's extremely strong. And there are 2 points to, every time you're making a deck. There are cards that I call trap cards, and there's like two different ways to see that. There are cards that seem good but are not good, and that's why they're a trap.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's cards like Fanatic that seem to be nothing that special but are actually very strong. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's the thing, like you said, like the trap cards, that's a good point, because there are those cards where like people are like, oh, I really like that, like the Termite Drill, right? That's a recent one that a lot of people on release, the legendary that for the Mechanicum and the neutrals, that you can pay energy and you draw a card, and if it's a troop, you can give it flanking. A lot of people thought like, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be, and then you play it and you realize like, no, it doesn't work that way. I think Iron Duke did a video like it doesn't work that way, and it's,
oh man, I was so heartbroken to find that out.
It's not like you can learn that lesson pretty quickly. Like initially, like there's some that you have to learn that lesson with time. That like the Greater Demon, it's the least played Greater Demon. It's the 6/7 one that has Battle Honor. Copy the troop that this like.
Oh yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Abyssa.
Abyssa, I really like the idea of that, but I can never make her work. She doesn't have flanking. She doesn't have. I mean, if you had mutations and you got lucky and got the flanking mutations, but then she's got maintenance, and her health and her attack are never high enough. So, it took a long time for me to realize, like in terms of put her in the deck, and I would never have the option, or I would have a better option to play, and then if I played her, you never get anything from her, and then you realize like, yeah, it's on paper it looks really good. In practice, after time, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, you begin to realize that, well, this doesn't exactly seem good, right? So there's a lot of cards that, when you look at it, seem to be very nice, but are actually, not that good. But that's why we pretty much call them trap cards. Like, for example, for a new player, I could imagine that Thunder of Horus might seem like a good card, but no. Yeah, compared to something like Helios Mortar Carriers, which are of the same cost, even after the nerf, they are like 1,000 times better, right? Because it instantly gives you value, and it has presence.
Yeah, as a new player, you're like, well, that's got higher stats. Like, why wouldn't I take that?
Oh, I can think of a trap card in the Legion I play, Word Bearers, Captain Apostle. Oh, he looks so good. Don't pick Captain Apostle over Dark Martyr, people at home. You'll break my heart.
Yeah. Yeah, there are those ones like it just looks like it's great, and then you don't realize that you think you're playing the higher power game. And I think some of it comes to just like the mechanics, like sometimes depending on the faction, people not realizing how powerful a mechanic might be if it's got ward or survivor or stealth. Rally effects I think are probably one of the most powerful effects. In terms of my listing, I probably rank them in the top 10. And they don't seem that great sometimes. Like, it's kind of moderate, it's okay, but you're guaranteed to get it. It's a guaranteed given, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to make your opponent not want to return it back to your hand. So you're going to have that body stick on the board that your opponent has to deal with. That's much more consistent than a card that has a backlash effect, which your opponent might be able to control and choose on how that's going to trigger.
It's usually about how slow something is, right? So how fast it gives value and how slowly it gives value. So usually Relentless is the one that is slowest. And some Relentless effects that seem to be extremely good, well, are usually not that good. I mean, if you take Mount Pharos, for example, I mean, it does have a great place in a lot of decks, but it's not something that you instantly include everywhere because, oh, wow, it's going to give me an Astartes, it's going to be cheaper. Well, yes, but you should keep in mind that you're skipping a turn in order to play that.
Right.
So if it was a rally, it gives you something, and then had Relentless, it would be extremely powerful.
Yeah. Well,
so, for example, that's what makes Terek Squad so good in Iron Hands, right? So you play it, it's 2/3, it has Rally, and it has Relentless. So instant value plus value for every turn it stays alive.
Yes. We saw that with the Weapons Depot for the Knight household. Like, that was a card that, like, a lot of people were like, that wasn't that big of a deal. It had Rally. Like, no, that was a big deal. Like, trust me. Playing Knights, and I play that down there, and my Graviton is instantly a 9 energy, and whether you destroy it or not, I can play that Graviton a turn earlier, guaranteed. That makes a huge deal. So Rally, the speed is a big aspect. I think Siege is probably still the lowest. It's hard to say if all of the Siege effects are more powerful than some of the Relentless effects, but in terms of speed, definitely slower.
Definitely.
Yeah, they're certainly slow. The only one that has like crazy, insane value is basically Perturabo's own Siege, which you're going to be feeling in your face pretty every other turn.
And you're guaranteed for that, as opposed to this troop has to survive, or stay on the board.
Yeah, that's why, for example, I always preferred Forge Complex over like the Pyramid or whatever, because, of course you skip a turn once again, but it's guaranteed to stick till the end of the game. And that is why.
Yeah, I think in value, as far as that goes, like, there are some great troops that generate cards, whether it's Jubok, Pharos, Pyramid. I think of like 2 or 3 more, Kai. Those are all good. Anything that goes on your Warlord that creates a long-lasting game effect, whether that is the Eightfold Brand, Forge Complex, the healing tactic for the Knight household, which is kind of like a Forge Complex light. Those are so much better because your opponents can't cancel them. They can't do anything about it. You played this card, you're going to get this effect. There's no flanking. There's no, win of the week. There's no random removal. You're going to get that effect. You're giving up the turn, just as you would if you were playing that troop and not doing anything with it. But your opponent has no way to respond to it. Whether you're giving your Warlord Mercy and Forgiveness, or you're giving him Skilled Rider, or you're giving him a Gore Child, any of those tactics that go on your Warlord are instant, permanent value. Those are just great cards to have. Like, there's some that are obviously, like Horned Raiment, and we talked a little bit about that. I mean, if Horned Raiment had a Rally in addition to its Relentless, it would get played a whole heck of a lot more. At 7 energy, at 7 energy, that's a big turn to give up playing anything, But at the same time, I feel like if it was 5 energy, it might be too powerful, because that's mid game for a shield every turn at that point. So I understand. Like, I don't know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, speaking of Horned Raiment, Thousand Suns are probably the one that I really like using those kind of cards with, because you give up a turn, you play Complex, and the next turn you actually can re-seize the initiative because you have your Psychic power. So you basically play 2 cards instead of just 1. So you respond and play something, and that's pretty big.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and Forge Complex gets better for them over the longer terms of the game. When you're playtesting, at what point do you decide this is a long-term deck or long-term Warlord? I mean, is it just by the nature of the cards that you're putting it in, Or is it based off of playing and realizing that this is really when all my options come online? Like, obviously, there's Desperate Defense, and you could do a ramp deck with Desperate Defense and try to get there faster, or you could just naturally progress there. That's going to be a late game build in general, and usually you go into it knowing I have to get to 10 energy to play this card, unless you're Saltarvitz, right? But there are a lot of other builds, and Magnus is a prime example of those, where the longer you go, the more Psyker energy you have, or the more cards at your disposal, the more control or tools you should have at the game to help swing things in your favor. Do you come to that realization just over the course of playtesting, or do you kind of control those factors based off of what else you're putting into the deck before you start with it?
So basically 2 parts. When I play something in a deck, so when I decide to put something in my deck, I usually want it to synergize with something. So I try to avoid cards with the least synergy usually, because, for example, if you are playing a Forge Complex, you have to also decide and be ready for the fact that, I played Forge Complex and my opponent now will play something. So I should have something else to respond to that. Or let's say I'm going to play Slayer of Worlds. Well, I should have Jam, because if my opponent either plays around that Slayer of Worlds with Frontline or Stun, then I'm just in a losing situation. But afterwards, playing games also shows something, because something in theory that can be, good might actually be really, really bad in practice. So I guess it still boils down into actually seeing all of these ideas in action during playing.
Just getting a good feel that way. Yeah. Well, we're at the hour and 20 mark, which is surprising, but that's where we're at. Physics, I would like to get you on down again for another episode down the road, because I know you've done some videos where you've done tier rankings, and I'd like to do at some point some videos or some podcast episodes where we're talking about ranking, whether it's legendary cards, factions, warlords, mechanics. I definitely think that's a series of topics down the road. I appreciate you coming on to talk tonight, but I'd like to get you on later on down the road if that's possible.
Well, yeah, any weekend, if we decide a couple of days earlier, I would love to be featured in another episode. So I really enjoy. I think this is also, good for the community and good for me as well. I mean, you take something out of every discussion, so pretty awesome.
Well,
hit me up anytime.
Absolutely, it's nice to be able to get to touch base with all the players out there. I mean, chatting on Discord is one thing, but actually being able to have a conversation sometimes is just organic in its own. And next episode, we're going to be talking with the tournament organizers, a couple tournament organizers regarding Discord tournaments, Horus Heresy Legion tournaments. There's a couple tournament series that are going to be starting up that we're excited for, and we'll be talking about that.
World Cup.
Yeah, World Cup is going to be big. So with that, that's the next one coming up here to discuss. But before we go, in general, I just wanted, because we talked about you as a player, your background, kind of how you got involved with the content stuff. What do you do when you're not playing Horus Heresy Legions and you're not teaching, obviously?
Well, there's quite a lot of stuff that I do, I would say. I mean, if I'm not doing work, pretty much, and if I'm not doing extracurricular activities or something, I do a lot of stuff. I like playing chess a lot. I like drawing a lot, digital drawing, digital art. I like playing a lot of other games as well. I played computer games since I was 7 or something. So yeah, and I also have been fencing for quite a bit. So yeah, some sport here and there.
All right. Very good. Yeah, it's always nice to know the other facets of players. Do you have anything that you would like to plug?
Let's see. I think there's a lot of stuff just to fit right now. But yeah, I mean, in general, I really hope to see a lot more stuff like the thing that we're doing right now, because the more this community goes into touch, the better it kind of becomes to play. Because one thing that's really, really nice about the community itself is that, oh man, compared to other games, the toxicity is very low. So
It depends, but I see what you mean.
It depends, of course. There's always a level of toxicity in games, but if I do compare this to other games that I've played, it doesn't even get close.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Now that I actually think about it in the wide range of things I've played, this is pretty calm.
It's definitely been a good community, and it really is. I mean, we're talking about tournaments next week, but content creators, tournament organizers, mods on Discord, those are, I mean, every guild made the game, but everything that's involved with it, whether that's the global chat or lodges, lodge efforts in events, the community all has really built things up. And I think it's all community run, so it's nice to be part of that and keep that going. I would like to get to a point where, I don't know, we have like 100, 200 actual listeners to the podcast, and then I could reach out to every guild and see if I can get one of their guys on to do a special episode to kind of pick their brain a little bit more. I'd like to dive more into that, but at the same time, I still like talking to the players because there's so much to learn. We've got so many players out there from all over the world, and everybody's got a different take on why they play, what they play. It's always nice to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a pretty cool question. So why we actually play? So I played a lot of card games, but the reason why I'm also hooked on this one right now, well, I would say the main reason is because it's Warhammer. And that's because there's not a lot of Warhammer online games that you can actually play for 40K, or 40K games that you can actively play. I mean, there was always Dawn of War, which I really love and love till this day, but it's not as active right now, I think, as this is, for example.
Yeah, I want to do a whole episode on why we play. I've always wanted to do a video on that, but I feel like it would end up being me just talking a lot. So I think the podcast format is a better way because then there's more of a discussion because, yeah, there's so many reasons. Like, I play because it's fun, but definitely because I enjoy card games and primarily because I like 40K, I like Horus Heresy, I like the characters that dives me in. Like, I'm not playing for money. I'm not playing for fame or glory. It's just I like playing card games, and it's got the right spice, the right flair to kind of hook me. I wasn't ever, there hasn't been anything about this game that I've kind of been like, this looks like a copy-paste version. Now, I understand that every guild has a Draken Lords or whatever it is game that they did prior to this. And
this is just a copy-paste of.
Right, which I've heard. And I've never played it, so I can't make that comparison. But I have seen, definitely, games, even as it relates to the Warhammer 40K IP, that have been very clearly like, well, this is the exact same game as this other game, but with a different reskin, and that in itself kind of drives me. Or like when I was playing card games, I think the Star Wars Living card game from Fantasy Flight Games, they tried to make it its own thing, but it really felt like a copy paste of the Game of Thrones card game. And there wasn't enough that felt like it was unique and Star Warsy for me to really sink my teeth into, which is a shame because I love Star Wars and I was really, really looking forward to playing that game. I've not had that experience with Legions. So
for me, I've always loved 40K Worlds. So the minute I found a card game for it, and I've dabbled in card game before, I just went, fuck yeah, I finally found something to kill time while I'm on break.
Yeah, I mean, I was always also looking for some, a new 40K and 8K game. The other Warhammer game that I play really actively is Warhammer Total War, but that's for the fantasy Warhammer. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I've seen videos of it. I'm not a huge Warhammer Fantasy guy myself, but I could see why people would want to play it. If there was a I don't know if you could do a 40K version the same way, because I mean the 40K universe is completely different than the fantasy setting. Fantasy armies. Might be able to
do, like Horus Heresy. You could do something similar. It wouldn't be the same because it would be primarily ranged combat. But you could probably make that work. I would love to see that.
I would like that, or if they could. I just finished up the Imperial campaign for Battlefleet, Gothic, Armada 2. I've still got like the other 3 campaigns to do, but that was really fun. Different theater of war altogether. But I've got Space Hulk to play, which is an older game, but that's a totally different setting. Like 40K is so rich, and there's so many ways to play it. Whether you're doing, Necromunda, which is a whole different thing of itself, but it's still tied into the whole setting, or you're playing, Dawn of War. It's just whatever flavor it is that suits you. If it's unique enough, and in this instance, if we're talking about a card game, it's got characters, warlords fighting warlords, legions fighting legions, and you just get that feeling that you can get invested into it, as opposed to just like, it's a 1/1 faceless, nameless commander, and you're dealing damage to a faceless, nameless opponent. You've got games like that do that already. Putting that warlord out front, that your character is this person, I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly gives a different flavor to any type of game. I mean, when you can actually relate to your characters in a way, they have a background, they have a story, and that kind of gives you some really cool feeling. For example, when you let's say you're right now, so when you're playing Conrad and you're facing against the Lion and they start like squaring off with their interactions, that's gives you this feeling that, oh wow, I know why this is
right.
I know that, and that's pretty cool.
And then we get to do with the prisoner custody. It's really thematic.
Oh yeah,
I love that card. Like throwing down a prisoner custody on Kurz is just the ultimate. Like that just is a righteous moment right there.
Yeah, that's one of the things that you have to do in Horus Heresy Legions once, at least.
Yes, there should be more challenges like that. Like we've got a small list of challenges, and I've asked that a couple times in the Q&As, like if they could add more challenges, like poison X amount of troops, or play X amount of drop pod troops. But there should be those little nuanced troops that like you can do it like a one-time thing, like like have like beat Magnus shard of Magnus with Leman Russ, or
Edict of Censure Magnus.
Yeah, play Edict of Censure against a Thousand Suns opponent, or something like that. Like if you just do it, it's just a little hidden Easter egg. Like I would like to see more of that. That'd be cool.
Yeah, that would be very cool. I think it's really possible to kind of get those kind of stuff later on, because I can see that the game is still going forward. I mean, I don't see why not. There's a lot of things that they could do. Yeah. And that is one of those things.
Yeah, I think the game has still got a year or 2 years life in it. Beyond that, it could have a lot more as long as Everguild's invested into it. The IP is rich, and they just have to go. They've got all the factions that they could go back to and revisit. We still don't have the Imperial Fists, but we should get them in 2 or 3 months. I'm stoked for that. Yeah, and then if they were to do a 40K version, I don't know. I don't know if I can make that jump. I would want to, but at the same time, after so much time in Legions, it would be hard just to step away. I'd have to do both.
Yeah, if they would do a new one, this would also be a point that what happens, is it going to be like an expansion for this one? Is it going to change something, or is it going to be a separate game on its own?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and as a game company, then they have to make that call, because if they put a new product out, then they're competing with themselves, and that's never a good model to go with.
Yeah, that's definitely not, especially if you want to keep the fans alive.
Right. Well, there's a lot of players who would move over. I know people ask it all the time, but then there's ones who wouldn't. But like, well, what about it? It could come off badly if they're like, well, what about the game I've been playing for 3 or 4 years? Like, we're just going to walk away from that? I don't know how I feel about that. I might be one of those guys. I don't know. I don't know how I feel right now.
Yeah, that's a big question, to be honest.
Yep.
What exactly is going to happen with that? Though I gotta say, I would love to see some orcs. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Orcs and Tyranids. If I had to play 40, we still got a little bit of time before we go, but I'm thinking, like, if I had to play a 40K version, and we had all of the factions that are in the 40K universe as their own factions, that's hard to do because there's so many Space Marine chapters. I don't know how you would just do that. I would love to play Imperial Fists or Black Templars or Crimson Fists.
Oh, there's an infinite amount.
Yeah, like that like just makes it like you might as well just have Space Marines, which is so generic. But you could do it that way. But if I wasn't playing, if I wasn't playing a Space Marine, I don't know. Necrons are probably really interesting to me. I've always liked them, and I like the fact that they've expanded the lore with them so much more, made them more interesting.
Yeah, Necrons would be really, really cool to have, actually. I love the Mechanicus Necron game, basically. That was one of the best things.
Cool, yeah.
I've got to play that. I've got to get that. I know I was waiting for that to go on sale on Steam, because that looks really cool.
Yeah, that's a very good game. I definitely recommend it.
Well, Axel, do you have anything to plug?
The war in Quebec is still ongoing. Besides that, no, not really.
You know what? I didn't give you a chance to rant about the new font. Do you want to rant about the new font?
Oh, yes. Now I'm going to rant about the new font. For those at home who have not logged on in the last week and a bit, they've completely redid the font for readability. Now, on paper, oh, great. Everyone's going to be able to read it easier. It was already legible. Now it's just obnoxious to look at. It's too skinny and tall. It looks bad on the card because it kind of moves off the little symbols they got for the damage and the health. When the card gets damaged itself, the red changes color into a way that's harder to read. It's a nightmare. I hate it. This might be the worst thing they've ever done.
What are your thoughts on the font physics?
Well, I can't say I really enjoy it, to be honest, because when I look at it, it kind of feels as if it's, when you take, if somebody wrote something inside Microsoft Word, then put it in Photoshop and stretched it or something. It really doesn't look smooth at all. The first time that I looked at it, my eyes started to hurt a bit, and I thought that maybe it's because, this is a new thing, so I need to adjust to it. And yeah, I did adjust, but I really do not enjoy how it is right now. I think that it's not that it's clearer, it's actually a bit more annoying. So yeah, not a big fan.
I think the font works if it's just like, where it says like Terra practice, like if it's a single bold big thing. But in the chat, in the main chord, in the little text boxes, it's too close together, and I don't like it. I haven't seen anybody who has liked the font at all. I think their idea, from what their announcement was they changed up the font so they could expand or increase the menus in some way. And I have to feel that there's got to be a better font for that, like that they could choose a different font and make the menus and the text boxes still work. I don't think there's just one font that we have to be locked to. I would almost prefer the old font at like one notch smaller, like instead of 10 font, have an 8 font, if that's what it takes, as opposed to having something that like, it's just hard to read, especially if you have a lot of like L's and T's in the same word.
Yeah, that would certainly be a better solution. So yeah. I really do hope that this gets reverted at some point, because I don't see good comments on it. So basically, I think the community has basically said that they don't like it, and I think that they're going to take that into consideration. And if they don't, I guess it's not bad to hope.
I'll be sad.
We'll keep playing the game, but we won't like it. We won't like the font. And I hope we haven't had a dev Q&A, so in the next dev Q&A, if the font's not changed by them, they might get some. They might get an earful. I'm gonna go ahead and plug deck slots, because I always do. We are at
#remove deck slots.
No, #more deck slots, please. We are at full capacity. We need more deck slots. I can sense on the horizon we have a raid boss coming. I expect within 2 to 3 events we're going to get that raid boss, and with that raid boss usually comes 2 to 3 new warlords that are neutral. And if we don't have deck slots to make those guys fit in there, I'm going to be sad. I'm also going to plug up. We've got the World Cup. Discussions about the World Cup are taking place on the Discord. So if you're interested in that, if that's perks your ears up, check out the Discord and log into the tournament section. They also check out the weekly tournaments that have gone on there. We just wrapped up a Bar Night Legions tournament last night. We do those every few weeks. We've got Bar Night Legions. We've got subreddit tournaments. I've got the monthly deck list contest. There are 4 days left. By the time this episode airs, that window will have shut, but we will be talking about the March deck list contest. Check out Def, Not Your Physics Teacher's YouTube channel. Definitely Not Your Physics Teacher. Do the search. It's on YouTube. Check it out. He's got his videos there, and trying to think if we got anything else. I think we covered just about everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. Thanks for making it on. Glad we were able to make this work. And like I said, hopefully we can get you back on at a later episode.
All right. Thanks for having me. And I'll be sure to be featured once again when I get the chance.
Sounds good. All right, Axel. We'll talk to you later.
It was a lovely time.
Bye.